In the groundbreaking new PBS documentary, Women, War, and Peace, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton says, and I quote, "I think it's way past time to redefine what we mean by war because there are no front lines in the wars in today's world. The fact is that in today's wars, the primary victims are women and children." Up next on Another View, what if we looked at war and peace as though women mattered? Where do women get the strength to survive the ravages of war? What role do they play in global conflict? How do they participate at the peace table? Stay tuned for a riveting discussion about women, war, and peace right after the news from NPR.
Discussing the issues and celebrating the successes of the African American community. This is Another View.
And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Welcome to Another View. We've got a great show for you today, but before we get into the topic of women, war, and peace, just want to take a moment to pay tribute to two civil rights icons who we lost this week. First, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth. He's the icon. He was hailed in Alabama as the Black Moses. He died on Wednesday. Reverend Shuttlesworth was one of the founders of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Atlanta in 1957. That organization was started to work for equality for African Americans and for everyone. And he passed away this past Wednesday. He was 89 years old. And then on Thursday, Derek Bell died, and he is the first Black tenured professor at Harvard Law School and the first African American dean at a non-Black law school. And he was legendary. He worked with Medgar Evers, worked for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, wrote the book Race, Racism, and American Law. And Professor Bell was also way ahead of his time. He was a heterosexual Black married man who publicly supported gay marriage long before any state actually allowed it. And so he was out there. He said that the laws of most countries recognize only unions between a man and woman is testimony to what a slow and lumbering creature the law can be, and not to any ultimate validity of those laws. So he was way ahead of his time. He talked about that back in 2002. So we want to say to their families, to the Bell family, and to the Shuttlesworth family, that we wish you peace. And today we are talking about women, war, and peace. We're examining the global conflict through the eyes of women, and it's an appropriate topic for Another View, as most global conflicts right now involve people of color. WHRO-TV is proud to bring you the 5-part series Women, War, and Peace, airing on 5 consecutive Tuesdays on Channel 15, starting October 11th, next Tuesday. Before I introduce our guests, let's listen to an excerpt from the show.
Men of substance do not abuse women.
We are fed up with the war.
They thought that none of us would survive to tell the truth.
You cannot take our land away from us.
You look at the frontline discussion of wars, and this is what the newspapers report on. The fighting tactics, the troops, the politics, the borders, the weapons, the armies, all of these things. That is a men's story. The backline discussion of the story is how you actually exist and live and continue on living in war. That's a woman's story. And that story has never been told.
But that story is being told through Women, War, and Peace, a 5-part PBS series starting this coming Tuesday. And joining us on the phone is the executive producer, one of the executive producers of this program, Abigail Disney. Hi, Abby. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. We appreciate you being here. So how fortuitous today that Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Layman Gabawi, and Tawakkul Karman all received the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes, and in fact, you actually, in that sequence you just played, heard Layma's voice in there. So, and I just said goodbye to her. She's off doing press and publicity around the city. Pretty exciting.
Oh my goodness, that's incredibly exciting. But you've been in this thought of Women, War, and Peace for quite a while now. Tell us how you decided to put this groundbreaking programming together.
Well, it started with Pray the Devil Back to Hell, which was the film that brought me together with Layma and our co-producers. And it was just interesting that, here was this very amazing, compelling story of women who had really been smart and strategic and brave about fighting for peace in a nonviolent way, but that nobody had covered it. No one had covered it. I didn't know it. It wasn't in the New York Times. CNN was there. They didn't cover it. So, that always kind of, bothered me. And we made the film in part as a reaction to the way that nobody covered it. Mm-hmm. But, it also occurred to us as we were working, and then to our third co-producer who came in to the process after us, that there was this enormous story to tell that is missing from all of the films, all of the fictions, all of the newspaper articles, and the enormous amount of popular culture. There's just this silence about what it is that happens to women in wartime, and more than that, what it is that women bring to the discussion about resolving the conflicts and building the peace.
Because that is the issue, too, that women are actually involved in helping to broker peace, but we really don't hear that much about their participation. You
never hear it. And just to give you a sense of how powerful these forces are, when we, gathered all the archival material to make Pray the Devil Back to Hell, we saw, hours and hours of footage of men shooting at each other. There was just no end to it. There was nothing with women in it, much less women doing something constructive. Every image that we found that had a woman in it is actually in the film. Mm-hmm. Because that's how fierce it was.
Because I guess the people think, well, of course there wouldn't be women in that footage because they're being protected. They're being put away someplace safe. Not true, is it?
Right. So not true. I mean, there's a perception that there's kind of almost like a football field, and there's this place in the middle of nowhere where you go and do your fighting, and then there's sidelines and backlines and so forth. And there is no such place. And that was always true, but it's never been more true than now. Now the wars are coming right through villages, through cities, into people's living rooms. And, to pretend that there's a front line or a back line or any kind of formal structure to it is just ridiculous.
Can you tell us, there are 5 parts to the series. Can you give us a brief synopsis on each one? First one that we're going to see Tuesday night is I Came to Testify. Is that right?
And I Came to Testify is really about how women rape victims at the end of the Bosnian War chose to speak, which was a really big deal. This is the first group of victims that have ever chosen to say, what happened to us didn't have to happen to us. It wasn't normal, natural, understandable, inevitable. It was none of these things, and they need to be held to account. Mm-hmm. So they changed international law forever, and it's pretty huge. Wow. The second hour is Pray the Devil Back to Hell, which is the story of Layma Bowie and the Liberian women and this unbelievable nonviolent resistance they built to the war in Liberia. The third hour is called Peace Unveiled, and it's really an attempt to follow these 3 different women who are in the Afghan Women's Network and watch them think and strategize and try to make themselves be a part of the peace talks that have been going on off and on for a couple of years in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. Because they know that if the men don't permit the women into the peace talks, the first thing that they will barter away is women's rights. Mm-hmm. And then the fourth hour is called The War We Are Living, and that's really about how even though a war is over, if the weapons remain and the problems remain, it doesn't feel like war is over for most people. And the paramilitaries in Colombia are still quite vigorous, and they are still working hard to take control of land and resources. And there's a group of people that lives on gold, and the women leaders of their group are doing some amazing resistance to being pushed off their land. And then finally, the fifth hour is called War Redefined, and it just tells the story in more intellectual terms. Why does this matter? How has it changed? And what is it that we're missing when we talk about peace without taking women into consideration?
It sounds just so powerful. And the screener that we are going to be using as we hold some public conversations about this is just really, really powerful. I want to ask you one last question before we let you go. I noticed that you're using Matt Damon, Tilda Swinton, Gina Davis, and Alfred Woodard as narrators. Yeah. How did they get involved, and what do they bring to this discussion?
Well, they got involved partly because the producers begged and pleaded and wheedled, usual way. We really wanted high-profile names because they do, in fact, help you find audience. That's, indisputable. Mm-hmm. But genuine, authentic people who really aren't just using their name, attaching their name to something to make themselves seem better. Mm-hmm. People who really understood the issues. And someone like Matt Damon, for instance, in fact, we put him on the hour about sexual violence, which is, I know most people think very counterintuitive, but, it was really important to have a male voice be the voice of outrage and indignation about what happened to these women. We've just spent too many years listening to women be upset about it.
Let's get a different perspective, and maybe more people will pay attention.
Yeah, and he really does. He gave us a really great interview, which is up on our website, womenwarandpeace.org, where he talks about precisely this, why men should care, or why is it that only women watch things that are about women? Because my experience is that when we do show this stuff to men, they find it incredibly interesting.
Mm-hmm. Abby, what do you hope people get out of watching the series?
Well, I first of all hope that it opens up our eyes to the idea that, first of all, combat and war are not the same thing. Mm-hmm. Combat is a smaller subset of a larger thing called war. And war really encompasses cultures and countries and entire economies and systems and so forth. And so it touches really every aspect of people's lives. And so if we just think about combat when we think about war, I think we underestimate how totalizing the experience is for everyone. And then just to have a look at war through a woman's eyes does have a way of melting away some of the aesthetics of it. And, it cannot be fought, really, without a sort of aesthetics at the root of it. And aesthetics, and what I mean by that is a kind of romanticized notion of what it means to be a hero and a man at his finest hour and all of that kind of stuff. That is most of what we've been raised on in terms of war. And I'm just not so sure that those very beautiful, noble, compelling things really hold up when you take a look at the whole picture and all the consequences of war.
Well, it is a compelling series. We encourage our listeners here in the Hampton Roads area to watch Channel 15 starting on Tuesday, October the 11th. It's called Women, War, and Peace. Abby Disney, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. Thanks so much. Okay,
you take care. There are stories of women right here in Hampton Roads, the women who have been through what Abby is talking about and what the documentary expounds. And for 16 months, Rose Mapendo and her 7 children were prisoners at a death camp in the Congo. Her story of survival is nothing short of miraculous. Our Lisa Godley recently sat down with this courageous woman of faith who endured so much for so long and is now sharing her experiences in hopes of encouraging others while helping those left behind.
Rose Mapendo says she was well aware that the government had ordered members of the Tutsi tribe to be killed, but she thought the genocide was only toward the Tutsi in Rwanda. She never dreamed the Tutsi from the Congo were also in danger.
But because I am Mnyamulenge, I'm not a Tutsi from Rwanda. I did not at all think can be happen to us. But the government decided to arrest my family also.
The year was 1998. Rose and her husband were running a successful butcher business and raising a large family. 7 children in all. The oldest 15, the youngest just 10 months old.
They took us without anything. They asked you to put your hands on. And they put us to the truck. It was 5 families.
Once they arrived at the death camp, they made the families watch as they murdered their husbands and fathers.
It was, they put men in front of us. Plus we can watch how they make them, torture them, suffering, take the clothes out. We wish to be like them because they died quickly. They killed them. They did not take a long time like us.
Rose says the soldiers refused to shoot the women and children, calling them a waste of bullets.
They say women, they are nothing. They have to die from nothing.
For the next 16 months, Rose, her 7 children, and 4 other families were left to starve in deplorable conditions. And in the midst of it all, Rose realized that she was pregnant.
It was the flies everywhere. It was the lice everywhere. When I gave birth to twins, surrounded with the 29 children, in dark, without any light, without even a season to cut the umbilical cord.
So they used a piece of wood. In her pain, Rose had a revelation. She decided to forgive the high commanders who ran the death camp and named her twins after them.
The best honor you can give it to your best friend is to name your child after him. Our release was connected through the forgiveness, because when I named the commanders, when it was a time for all of us to be killed, the commanders, I named them, they said we can't kill them here. And they sent us to different regions with capital. Those commanders said, in a culture, you cannot kill somebody who was named after you.
In the new camp, Rose's 14-year-old son was considered a man and was scheduled to be executed.
Sometimes you think if when the sun was going down, who's going to be the next tonight?
In an effort to save her son's life, Rose asked her oldest daughter if she would agree to marry one of the soldiers. She agreed.
The same military who had my daughter, he went to talk to our President Kabila, who is president today. He said, in that area, there is a people captivity. One of them is my wife. I love her, and I want you to do something. He gave an order, they cannot kill you no more.
Rose's twins, who were 8 months old, weighed just 2 pounds.
Nobody can believe they can survive. That's a miracle. And really, I want always to encourage people for no matter what, to never give up.
The twins are now 12, healthy and happy. And so are the rest of Rose's children, the oldest now 29, and all eager to share their story of survival and forgiveness.
We should love one another. We should forgive the past, because I believe nobody can change outside without change what is inside.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And since her arrival in the United States, Rose Mapendo has been sending money to widows and orphans left behind in refugee camps. She started Mapendo International 6 years ago as a way to help refugees resettle to safer areas. And 2 of our guests know all about resettling and coming to safer areas. Joining me in the studio is Fidelite Gerson, who is from Burundi and has a fascinating story to tell, and Susan Smith with the Commonwealth Catholic Charities. Ladies, welcome to Another View.
Thank you for having us.
Fidelite, I'm looking at your face as you're listening to Rose's story.
Yes.
And you could relate to that story, couldn't you?
Yeah, I was youngest. Yeah, I was 14.
You were 14 when you were a refugee, when you were in a camp?
When I left Rwanda.
You left Rwanda?
Yeah, I'm from Burundi, but I was born in Rwanda.
Okay, so you were born in Rwanda.
Yes.
And then you went to Burundi
no,
escape?
I went to Tanzania.
To Tanzania,
yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And tell us what was happening to you at that time.
To me, that time it was hard from Rwanda to Tanzania. We worked, a lot of stuff to your head.
So you walked and you had to carry everything on your head.
Yes.
Wow.
Some people, they far apart. Some they you miss somebody if you come. You are with your parent. Mm-hmm. Your parent go that way and you go that way. If God said I can save you, when you go Tanzania, you get to Tanzania like 2 months.
So it took you like 2 months to walk. Is that what you mean?
2 months.
So a long time.
Long
and then
time.
once you got to Tanzania, what was it like living there?
When we get Tanzania, the agents from UN, Red Cross, they was get there already.
So they were there waiting to help you.
To help us. They gave us plastic sheetings and.
But you lived in a camp, didn't you?
Yeah, a camp.
On the ground.
Yeah, on the ground.
Now, how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have 2 brothers and 3 sisters.
Okay, so it was your mother and your father and your 2 brothers and 3 sisters?
Yes.
And you who all went together?
Yes.
How long did you have to stay there before you were able to come to the United States?
Okay. I stayed with my parents from when I got Tanzania. I got Tanzania 1994. And I stay with parents for
long time. Huh?
Yeah, long. Yeah, like 5 years.
Okay. And you lived in the camp for 5 years.
In the camp, and I got married, and in the camp I lived 13 years.
In the camp, you lived for 13 years.
Yeah, from 1994 to 2007.
And that's when you came to the U.S.?
Yes.
Susie, you helped Fidelity and her family, or your organization helped to bring them to the United States?
Well, they bring themselves. That's kind of one of those myths, is that we bring refugees to the United States, and that really is not true. Our families pay their air flight to come. They sign a promissory note and pay that airfare back. So they bring themselves, and we're at this end at the airport to receive them and get them settled in an apartment that we have been able to secure and for them, and use donated services, donated goods to furnish that apartment. We're able to get them to the rental office the next day to sign their lease, and then we have caseworkers that are just become really, really involved with them and help them get their basic services, the health department, Social Security, social services.
And I imagine there's a language barrier also that you have to overcome.
Right. And that's one thing that we do up front, is make sure that we have adequate language support in order to do that. Some of our caseworkers do speak the mother tongue of our refugees, but if that's not the case, then we will have contracted interpreters and translators on our end so that we can be sure that they understand what's going on. We don't want them signing paperwork just because we say sign on this line. Sure. We want them to understand what they're signing and what's going on in their lives.
Fidelity, when you were in the camp, what did you do on a daily basis? I'm trying to give people a sense of what it was like to live in that camp.
To live in camp, it was hard. But me, I was working in a hospital.
Okay.
My husband was working, he used to work in a hospital, in a laboratory. I was working in a maternity ward, deliver the babies.
And what made you decide, what happened to make you decide to come to America, to leave the camp?
That was the resettlement for the people who lives in a refugee camp long time.
Okay. So say that one more time. I want to make sure our listeners understand.
That's a resettlement.
Okay.
Yeah, for the people who lives long time in a refugee camp.
Refugee camp.
Yes.
They said you can move on now. It was time to go.
Uh-huh.
I see, and that's what brought you here. Let me bring into the conversation Dr. Jennifer Fish. She is the chair of the Women's Studies Department at Old Dominion University. Hi, Jennifer. How are you? And along with Christie Warren, who is a professor of the practice of international and comparative law and founding director of the program in comparative legal studies and post-conflict peacebuilding from William & Mary. Christie, you have the longest title on the planet.
People say it's taller than I am.
But as you've listened to Rose's story. I'm going to start with you, Jennifer, and you've listened to Fidelity here and what's going on. You go to Africa every summer, take students over to work with the peacebuilding process. Give us a sense of, I know you can empathize with what Fidelity has been through. Give us a sense of what's happening.
Very much so, Barbara. In fact, this year in March, I had the great fortune of taking 3 graduate students to a refugee camp at the border of the Congo and Rwanda called Kiziba Camp, where 19,000 people have been living for the past 17 years. Wow. And we had a life-changing experience in witnessing the stories of the people living there and what the United Nations would call human camps.
And people really need to understand, this is living on the ground. This is it's not... You're not living in a house. You're living in a camp, tent and the whole bit, right?
Right. The most basic human survival conditions, 11 kilos of rice per month, 9 kilos of pinto beans, and a little bit of oil and salt. Those are the basic rations every month. What we found there, to bring in the conditions that Abby discussed in the films, we found that women were actually more vulnerable in the camps because when they received their food rations, they would be approached in terms of finding access to food, among others. So the issues that you speak of are very close to my heart in terms of the work that we've done over the last 6 years. We have a partnership with a Rwandan university now, so we're promoting women's rights and the transformation in the country, which is a longer-term process of peacebuilding. Rather than simply the end of the 1994 violence.
Fidelity, how did you stay safe when you lived in the camps? Was it dangerous?
Yeah, that was dangerous because some people, they don't have enough food.
Enough food.
Yeah, there a lot of robot. They use the guns. Nobody was sleeping. But we got food stamp. Some people, the food they got, it wasn't enough to them.
So they wanted more, so they would come rob other people. So when did you get married to stay protected? Also, I'm just curious, or you just fell in love?
Yeah, I just fell in love.
You just fell in love, okay. Yeah. Jennifer, when you deal with disease, there's hunger, there's lack of education. You must feel overwhelmed sometimes when you go over to help.
Sometimes, Barbara, and at the same time, there's a simultaneous hopefulness that one can only experience in going to places like Rwanda and South Africa, where I work. We see incredible struggle. There's issues of HIV/AIDS now and the lingering residue of structural violence. We see women who are suffering. We see thousands and thousands of orphans. And So the human atrocities are right on the surface, even 17 years after major combat. And at the same time, we see grandmothers mobilizing in organizations to collectively care for societies. There's massive peace building on the ground. There are women advocating to make sure that police systems are in place to protect those who have survived sexual violence. So it's a simultaneous hopefulness and continued struggle.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about women, war, and peace, and the role that women play in global conflict. Our guests are Dr. Jennifer Fish, Chair of the Women's Studies Department at Old Dominion University, Fidelite Gerson, who is from Burundi, and Susan Smith with the Commonwealth Catholic Charities, and in our Williamsburg studio, Christie Warren, who is the Director of the William and Mary Law School Program in Comparative Legal Studies and Post-Conflict Peacebuilding. Christie, when you work with countries that are new democracies, I can't even imagine how you get that process started.
Mm-hmm. It is a challenge, and it's particularly challenging sometimes to get women involved in the process. I think one of the challenges that the global community is facing right now, and I think Secretary Clinton pointed this out in her suggestion that we redefine war, is kind of redefining the paradigms that lead to war, the power structures, and trying to break those down, those power structures that have traditionally excluded women, and then bringing women into the peace processes in a meaningful way. And that is proving to be quite a challenge in the same way that it's challenging to bring women into leadership positions in the United States, bringing them into peace building and peacemaking positions where they can actually make a change and mainstream the women's agenda into the peace building process has proven to be quite a challenge.
Mm-hmm. So how do you get started? When you go into a country to start this process, do you just kind of gather a bunch of women together to talk to them? What exactly happens? I'm trying to imagine in my mind how that comes together.
Yeah, well, I have not traditionally worked solely with women's groups. I last year served as the senior expert in constitutional issues for the United Nations mediation support team. So I was deployed actually to conflict zones along with a team of other people to facilitate dialogues and support mediation processes. And because I was a representative of the United Nations, and the United Nations has really tried to embrace women and include them in peace processes, I would always, of course, try and make that part of the work that I did in the field. But I was one of only 2 women on my team. So I would say that those issues, not only mainstreaming women's issues and including them, but bringing to the table issues that impact women directly. And I think some of our guests have spoken very eloquently to those. There are very concrete issues that impact women in a much more direct way than they impact men during conflict and during war. So trying to bring some of those issues to the table, even if we were not specifically talking about women, was something that we tried to do.
Can you describe, and I'm going to ask you the same question, Jennifer, to describe some of those issues? What are those issues that directly affect women that they may not consider if it's only men sitting at the table negotiating peace?
Well, I think what one of your earlier guests said about that war has been romanticized in the media and literature and movies is really true. I mean, if you think about even the movies that Matt Damon has been in, right?
Yes,
there's a brotherhood. There's a brotherhood of soldiers. My father was in World War II, and he used to talk about it, that his war buddies were people that he felt closest to, and nobody would ever come closer to him than the men that served alongside him. And he was injured. But the women's stories are lost. The women's stories are never articulated. They're issues of physical security, not only for the women themselves, but for their families, for the internally displaced people that come back following the war, their young sons who have been conscripted, their husbands who come back, how to integrate the children that they may have been impregnated with during the war. Women's rights to own and access land are huge issues following war, in a lot of these countries, women have not had the right to own land or grow their own crops to raise their families. If their husbands have been killed during war and the women are now in charge of supporting their families, their children, and they're not allowed to own land, grow crops, this is a big problem. Reconciliation is a big issue that women tend to be interested in. It's always dangerous to generalize, but we in the post-conflict justice field talk about the flip sides of the coin, justice versus reconciliation. Do you want to prosecute people who have committed war crimes, or is reconciliation among the community a greater priority? Which should come first in terms of sequencing? Women tend, again, I really hesitate to make generalizations, but women tend to be more interested in reconciliation before justice. They want the community to heal so that simple tasks can go forward. They can grow their gardens again. They can grow food to feed their children. They can put roofs on their houses. They can send their children back to school and celebrate their birthdays. And once the routine of daily life is reestablished, then justice becomes important to them, but usually not until then.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you, Jennifer, when you are in these communities, do you find that the women really want to stand up to move things forward, or are they just weary? I can't imagine living, day to day, bullets and the lifestyle, and then yet being able to have the strength to stand up and say, you know what, we need to take control of this and we need to move it forward so we can make it better.
I'll be the voice of optimism, and I'll say generally I witness women standing up, and I do work with women leaders in non-governmental organizations, mainly throughout Rwanda and South Africa. And I think about a woman, Olusia Nyumba, who in 1994, after the genocide, when Rwanda was left with 100,000 orphans, said, every family takes one. Every single family, regardless of ethnicity. And to date, my friends in Rwanda continue to take in orphans. What we're seeing in Rwanda right now, for example, is a crisis of double orphans, where children were orphaned during the genocide and they're now orphaned to HIV/AIDS. And you have children who were born during the genocide out of acts of violence who are now teenagers. I work with an organization called Avega, which is the largest widow organization in Rwanda, and they're now looking at helping teenagers in terms of their identity, coming to understand who they are so they don't perpetrate violence. So I think that there is a spirit of optimism, and of course the series Women, War, and Peace features that predominantly.
In that series. Susie, talk to us about the need to help refugees who come to Hampton Roads be able to really settle in. And are there certain, people tend to live in pockets because that's what they are comfortable with. But are there certain areas or communities where refugees from like places tend to live? How does that come together?
They do tend to like to live with their own ethnic group. Some of that is predetermined, though, because every apartment owner doesn't want to necessarily rent to the refugee population. So we struggle to find people that will work with us. People come to the United States without a Social Security number, without a work history. So apartment owners are not necessarily interested in having them as tenants. So we have to work to find a place that will work with us on that. So that some of that is determined by that.
And I also want to paint a picture for folks, because a lot of these refugees within their countries, they were people of stature. I mean, they had jobs, they were good citizens, and they were forced to move because of war. Right. But when they come to the United States, that's not necessarily recognized, is it?
That's a big disappointment, I think, to many refugees that are educated and well educated in their country, and they come here and find themselves working right alongside all the other very high physical labor job, and not being able to access their own education and their own professionality here. I think they find that very frustrating, and it takes years really before they can access their own education. And that's we do really try hard with their English language and have a good program for that, so that they can begin right away to develop English, which is really important to having a good success story here.
Fidelity, when you moved here, when you first came, what was it like? How hard was it for you?
That was hard because if I need something, I don't know how to ask for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was hard.
So using the services of people like Susie and Catholic Charities helped you to be able to settle down and settle in?
We have the interpreter from Congo. Mm-hmm. He was interpreter for us.
The interpreter for you, okay.
For us, yeah. I speak Swahili, and he taught them to English.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's how you were able to communicate through the interpreter.
If he's not there, I use the signal. I do this.
Oh, you move your hands and point to things.
Yeah, I
and
point
so
the
forth.
thing.
Yes, yes. Now tell me about your family that is here now. You and your husband both came from Tanzania, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And me, my husband, and 3 kids.
Okay. And how old are your children?
When we came here, the older, she was 7 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. Now she's 12.
She's 12. Okay.
Yeah. And the second one, his boy, he was 5 years.
He was 5 years old when he came.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now he's 9.
Now he's 9.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the youngest, she was 2. Now she's 6.
And now she's 6.
Yeah. And I have the American. He's 2.
So you have a baby who was born here in America.
Yeah. He was born 2008. November the 1st.
November the 1st, and he'll be 2. Oh,
yeah. He will be 3.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now, when you were living in Tanzania, and even before you got to Tanzania, what was your career as an adult? You said you were working in the hospital with the maternity ward. Is that right?
I work in Tanzania.
In Tanzania?
Yes.
In the hospital?
In a hospital.
As a nurse?
Yes.
Okay. And have you been able to use your nursing skills here?
Here, I take CNA classes.
Okay.
And
certified nursing assistant classes.
Yes. Yeah. But I take state board. I pass the skills, but I fail writing.
You passed the skills, but failed the writing part, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So now your extended family is also here, right?
Yes.
So your mom?
Yeah, my mom, my father, my 2 brothers, and my 3 sisters.
So everybody's here now.
Yeah, my cousin, my auntie.
Well, that's wonderful that their whole family has been here. Do you still have family in Tanzania?
No, Tanzania, no family. In Burundi, my husband, sisters, and brother
are still there.
Yeah, they're still there.
Are you trying to get them to come?
It's hard.
Because of the cost?
Yeah, the cost, and they are in their country. Now they are not in a refugee camp.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you never go back to Burundi, do you?
I don't know where it is. How it look like.
Wow.
Yeah. You know, my whole life is like a refugee camp.
Your whole life was a refugee camp?
Yes.
That often when the refugees come, Susie, do they go back home?
They can go back home after they've gained, they can have traveling documents when they're permanent residents, but they can also go back home after their citizenship, or depending on the situation. It depends on the temperature of the country, whether they're in violence or not. So it just takes time to be able to do that. It varies within among the countries.
So what's the biggest issue, if you could reach out to people right now and say, from our perspective, from the Commonwealth Catholic Charities perspective in helping these refugees, what do you need from the community?
Well, I'll have to echo President Obama on that and just say jobs, jobs, jobs. We bring hard workers and dedicated family people here that want to work. That's often the first thing that they tell you is, I will take any job. So that's a real important part of their resettlement process, is kind of working their way up from the bottom level employment to something that provides a living wage. So jobs are so important.
Jennifer, and Christie, I want to ask this of you also. What is the attitude, do you think, of Americans in terms of refugees coming here, number one, and secondly, in terms of kind of our perspective on why we should be helping, particularly the women and the children in these countries, because we don't experience this, not like they experience it.
Well, I'd say the general attitude of the country probably echoes what Susie offered in terms of a perception that we are giving gifts to outsiders, when in fact the circumstances of war and severe conflict that motivate people to move is something that's much more global and something that's often not processed. Part of our work actually with Susie's organization is to get students in contact with the international issues that are right here in our community, and we've had students become family mentors. I think it's important to realize that our government places all of this labor, this caretaking labor for refugee communities on faith-based organizations, and so the organizations receive 500 refugees, newly resettled refugees per year, and they generally have about 3 months to work with them in terms of total transition, language training, and the overall orientation to the United States, which can be overwhelming. And I don't think a lot of Americans might know that in terms of the government processes that determine who comes into our country and the decisions behind that. So there are very tangible ways in which we can get in touch with these issues right here in Hampton Roads.
Christie?
Yeah, I think an increase in education and public awareness would be very helpful. I think that, I can't speak just for Hampton Roads, but I think that nationwide people tend to confuse and mix together immigration issues and asylum issues, and they don't often understand what conditions people have been facing when they come to the United States. That they've been in danger, they've just come out of severe conflict, that their family members may have been killed. Because I think that immigration issues are such a lightning rod right now. So I do think an increase in public awareness about the way conflict issues really impact our local community is really important.
Fidelity, how have people treated you since you've been here?
The people for here, I appreciate for their help. But some people, when I speak, they say, I don't understand. I don't feel good. I say, when I go hospital, I don't need an interpreter. But if I tell somebody, they say they don't understand me.
Right.
How?
So you feel like you're communicating in such a way that they can understand you, but yet they still have trouble. And so sometimes that makes you feel bad because it's hard to get your point across.
Yes.
How about your children? Do you think that they have been able to settle in a little easier than perhaps you and your husband?
Yeah. Because the children, they're easy to run the thing.
Okay.
They speak
They speak very good English.
Yeah.
They've been able to
me.
They teach you.
Yeah. They make friends.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. And they're good students?
Yes, they are.
Very good students.
Yes.
That's great. So what would you tell people about accepting refugees like you in this country? What one thing do you want them to know? Do you want them to know that you're a hard worker and that you want to be here and to be a good citizen just like they are? Is that what you want to tell them?
Yeah, sure. I am a hard worker, and my husband too. We like to work and we like to help somebody, anybody, because they helped us Yeah.
Yeah, so you want to help back because they helped you. You actually, and we only have a little bit of time left, but you actually had a Habitat for Humanity house, right?
Yeah, sure.
So you worked on building that yourself?
Yeah.
How was that?
That was wonderful.
That was wonderful.
Yeah, because the African, we always had to work.
So you expect to do the same thing here?
Yes.
Absolutely. Christie, one last thing that you want to tell people, we've got about 2 minutes left, in terms of looking at this issue of women, war, and peace. What's important that they know?
You know, I think that there are some pretty impressive examples of women that have been involved in the peace process, and I'm so heartened by the Nobel Peace Awards this morning because I think 3 of those women have been recognized. But I think that more attention needs to be paid to including women in the peace process at the highest levels so that women's issues are heard and the actual impact of war on women and children is part of all of our collective consciousness.
And that's the final word from Christie Warren, Director of the William & Mary's Law School Program in Comparative Legal Studies and Post-Conflict Peacebuilding. Thank you, Christie, so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Jennifer, I'm going to ask you the same question. What one piece would you like to give?
You know, Barbara, to bring it full circle to your tribute this morning, I'd like to honor the last woman Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Wangari Maathai, whom we lost this year as well. And I will pay tribute to a role model in my life, the rebel rouser for peace in South Africa, Desmond Tutu's 80th birthday today.
Oh, fantastic. And that's Dr. Jennifer Fish, and she is the chair of the Women's Studies Department at Old Dominion University. Susie, one last word for us.
Yeah, I agree with Christie from William & Mary. We really need to increase our awareness, increase the awareness among our fellow Virginians and United States citizens of refugee resettlement and the good work that is done.
Susie Smith with the Commonwealth Catholic Charities, thank you so much for joining us. And Fidelite Gerson, thank you so much for sharing your story with us too. And we wish you the very best.
You're welcome.
Okay, and we'll be right back. Absolutely nothing. That's what war is good for. Before we leave you today, let me remind you of 2 informational workshops going on tomorrow that focus on our children. The United Way of Southampton Roads and the Minority Advisory Council present Is Your Child a Victim?, which gives you tools to detect if your child is being bullied and what to do about it. And the second one is Childhood Obesity, teaching young people how to make small changes that will improve self-esteem and create a healthier life. Both events are free. They're at the ODU Web Center. We've got more information on our website, anotherviewradio.org. And while you're there, sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. Next week, it's the second Friday of the month, so you know what that means. It's time for Another View Roundtable. You know the conversation will be lively. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next Friday for Another View.